The Battle of Bennington, fought on August 16, 1777, during the American Revolutionary War, was a pivotal engagement that helped undermine the British campaign to isolate New England from the other American colonies. While small in comparison to other major battles, Bennington had far-reaching consequences for the Saratoga campaign and, ultimately, the war's trajectory. The battle took place near Bennington, which was once part of New York, but is now located in Vermont, and pitted American militia forces, primarily from New England, against a mixed force of British regulars, German mercenaries, loyalists, and Native American allies. In 1777, British authorities devised a plan to quell the rebellion by dividing the American colonies. The strategy involved a three-pronged attack to isolate New England. General John Burgoyne led the central thrust, marching south from Canada via the Lake Champlain-Hudson River corridor to Albany, New York. He was joined by British forces moving east from Lake Ontario under Colonel Barry St. Leger, as well as a southern force led by General William Howe moving up the Hudson River from New York City. The convergence of these forces was supposed to crush the American resistance in the northeast and bring the rebellion to a quick end. Burgoyne launched his campaign in June 1777 with high hopes and a well-equipped army of approximately 8,000 men, comprising British regulars, German mercenaries primarily from Brunswick and Hessiana, Canadian militia, Loyalists, and Native America. Burgoyne captured Fort Ticonderoga with little resistance in early July, alarming the American forces. However, as he moved further south into New York, logistical challenges and rugged terrain slowed his progress. Supplies dwindled, communication with the other British columns became unreliable, and American resistance strengthened. By August, Burgoyne's army was in desperate need of supplies, particularly horses, provisions. The British command received word that the Americans had stockpiled significant supplies at Bennington and that the area was poorly defended. Burgoyne decided to send a detachment to seize the stores. This detachment, led by Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Baum, a German officer serving with the Brunswickers, consisted of approximately 100 men. The force consisted of German dragoons, loyalists from Quebec and New York, Canadian militia, and Native American scouts. Burgoyne's orders were to seize the supplies at Bennington and return quickly to the main army, avoiding unnecessary engagements. Baum's force left on August 11, 1777, and moved toward Bennington through the densely forested terrain. However, the mission soon ran into difficulties. Baum faced stiff resistance from American militia forces, led by General John Stark, a seasoned officer and veteran of the French and Indian War, who had previously fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill, and alongside General George Washington during the early stages of the Revolution. The New Hampshire legislature had recently appointed General Stark to lead the state's militia and regional defense. Stark had refused a commission in the Continental Army earlier that year due to disagreements over seniority. Still, his leadership and popularity made him an obvious choice to organize resistance in New Hampshire and Vermont. By mid-August, he had assembled a force of over 1,500 men, including New Hampshire militia, Massachusetts troops under Colonel Benjamin Simmons, and Vermont fighters known as the Green Mountain Boys, led by prominent figures such as Seth Warner. When Stark learned of Baum's movements, he quickly mobilized his troops and moved to intercept the British detachment before it reached Bennington's supply depot. On August 14 and 15, American forces tracked Baum's advance, setting up ambushes and strategically positioning themselves to surround the. Meanwhile, Baum set up a defensive position on a hill near the Walloomsac River, about 10 miles from Bennington. He dug in and waited for Burgoyne's reinforcements, realizing he was up against much stronger resistance than he had anticipated. Burgoyne sent reinforcements led by Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich von Breyman, another German officer, but they arrived too late to change the outcome. On the morning of August 16, 1777, General Stark decided to launch a coordinated attack on Baum's entrenched positions. He divided his forces into several columns, intending to surround the enemy from all sides. This tactical decision reflected Stark's military background and knowledge of the local terrain, which favored quick movements and flanking maneuvers. The Americans used the forest cover to approach undetected, launching their assault in the early afternoon under cloudy and rainy conditions. The battle began with fierce fighting as American militia units surrounded the British and German positions. Stark is famously said to have rallied his men with the words, "There they are," boys. We beat them today, or Molly Stark will sleep like a widow tonight. The American forces quickly gained the upper hand, overwhelming the defenders with their superior numbers, aggressive tactics, and terrain awareness. Baum's troops broke down after fierce hand-to-hand combat and a brief but brutal struggle. Baum was mortally wounded during the fighting and died shortly afterward. Just as the Americans were about to defeat Baum's force, von Bremen's reinforcements arrived on the battlefield. However, by this point, Stark had reorganized his forces and was ready for a second engagement. Additionally, reinforcements led by Colonel Seth Warner arrived from Manchester, Vermont, bolstering the American side. The Americans engaged Bremen's troops in a second, equally fierce round of fighting that lasted until the evening. The German reinforcements fought valiantly but were forced to retreat after suffering heavy casualties. Von Bremen lost nearly one-third of his forces, and many of the survivors fled in disarray. The American victory at Bennington proved decisive. Nearly 700 of Baum and Bremen's men were killed, injured, or captured. In comparison, Americans suffered relatively few casualties, with estimates ranging from 30 to 70 dead, and approximately 100 wounded. In addition to their tactical victories, the Americans captured valuable supplies, including weapons, ammunition, horses, and provisions, all of which were desperately needed by the militia and the Continental Army. The outcome of the Battle of Bennington had both immediate and long-term strategic implications. First and foremost, it deprived Burgoyne of the critical supplies and draft animals he required to continue his campaign. Second, the defeat and loss of nearly 1,000 troops harmed his army's operational capacity and morale. Third, the battle ended the illusion that British and German forces could operate freely in the American interior. The fierce resistance and eventual defeat eroded Native American confidence in the British cause, prompting many of Burgoyne's native allies to abandon the campaign. The victory also boosted American morale and support for the revolution. It demonstrated that the American militia, which was frequently derided as poorly trained and untrustworthy, could defeat professional European troops under the right conditions. The news of the victory spread rapidly throughout the colonies, encouraging increased enlistment and participation in the war effort. It also improved the political fortunes of leaders such as General Stark and the Vermont Patriots, legitimizing their opposition to British rule. The Battle of Bennington had a direct impact on General Burgoyne's army's eventual surrender at Saratoga on October 17, 1777. With his forces depleted and supply lines jeopardized, Burgoyne was forced to continue his advance in increasingly desperate circumstances. He was surrounded by a growing American force, led by General Horatio Gates, and was eventually forced to surrender. The American victory at Saratoga marked a watershed moment in the war, convincing France to form a formal alliance with the United States against Britain. This diplomatic and military alliance would prove decisive in the war's outcome. Colonel Seth Warner also played an important role, arriving with reinforcements at a critical time and helping to repel von Bremen's counterattack. Warner was a founding member of the Green Mountain Boys, a militia group formed to oppose New York's territorial claims over Vermont. He had previously distinguished himself at the Battle of Hubbarton in July 1777 and continued to serve honorably in the Northern Theater of the war. Colonel Seth Warner also played an important role, arriving with reinforcements at a critical time and helping to repel von Bremen's counterattack. Warner was a founding member of the Green Mountain Boys, a militia group formed to oppose New York's territorial claims over Vermont. He had previously distinguished himself at the Battle of Hubbarton in July 1777 and continued to serve honorably in the Northern Theater of the war. Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Baum, while ultimately unsuccessful, demonstrated bravery and dedication to his mission. He was operating under challenging conditions in hostile territory, with untrustworthy intelligence. His death on the battlefield highlighted the high cost borne by the British and their allies to secure supplies. Similarly, Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich von Bremen's attempt to rescue Baum was determined but unsuccessful due to timing and unexpectedly strong American resistance. The Battle of Bennington also demonstrated the American forces' increasingly effective use of intelligence, local knowledge, and guerrilla tactics. Militia units, once thought to be undisciplined and inferior to European regulars, demonstrated that in familiar terrain, and with competent leadership, they could deliver significant victory. The Americans' ability to coordinate movements, conduct flanking maneuvers, and exploit enemy weaknesses demonstrated a maturing military capability. From a historical perspective, the Battle of Bennington shaped Vermont's emerging identity and solidified its role in the Revolutionary War. Although Vermont was not yet a state, its militia and leaders played an essential role in the victory. The battle site is now preserved as the Bennington Battle Monument in Vermont, as a permanent memorial to the men who fought there, and the significance of their victory.